My boss called me useless in front of 12 people last month, and the worst part is, I didn't say a word back. No dramatic speech, no quitting on the spot, no coffee cup thrown at the wall. I just sat there, in a chair that suddenly felt about 3 sizes too small, while everyone pretended they were staring at the slide deck and not at me. What he didn't know was that in that exact moment, I stopped working for him. I was still in the room, still on the payroll, still breathing the same recycled air as everyone else. But something that had been quietly holding everything together in the background just let go. I'm 34, project coordinator in a mid-sized software company, which is a fancy way of saying I'm the guy who keeps track of the stuff other people forget. Dates, dependencies, who promised what to, which client, and by when. I'm not a genius. I'm not a founder. I don't have some inspiring, started from nothing story. I just know how to keep moving parts from crashing into each other. And for 5 years, that's exactly what I did for my team, and more importantly, for my boss. His name is Greg. Late 40s, expensively casual, the kind of guy who wears a hoodie that costs more than my rent and calls it startup energy. Our official job titles say I report to him, but if you looked at the email threads at 2 a.m. before a release, you'd think it was the other way around. When a client was angry, I was the one calling them. When a developer disappeared 2 days before a deadline, I was the one rewriting the timeline and pulling favors. When Greg forgot to send the report he'd promised the VP, I was the one staying late to build it from scratch, then letting him present it as his. Team player, they called me in performance reviews. Reliable, solid, the glue. Glue is just the stuff you don't notice until it's gone. The meeting where he called me useless was supposed to be a small thing. Thursday, 3 p.m., the main conference room. Status update for one of our bigger clients, a logistics company planning to roll out our platform to their whole network. We'd spent 3 months preparing for this phase. I had the milestones printed, the risks flagged. The questions I knew they'd ask already answered in a neat little appendix slide. I walked in 5 minutes early, because that's what I do, and the room was already half full. Developers hunched over their laptops, pretending to check code, but actually checking Slack. 2 people from sales whispering in the corner. Our HR manager, Megan, with her notebook and that neutral face you only get from years of listening to people lie. Greg stood at the head of the table, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled just enough to look busy. Eli, he said as I sat down, you've got your slides ready? Yeah, I nodded. Milestones, risks, mitigation, same structure as last month. He gave me a tight smile. Good. Keep it high level, though. They don't need the weeds. That was the first small flag of the day. The weeds are where the truth lives. But I just said, okay. The client joined on video, a polite face on a big screen at the far end of the room. We went through the intros, the jokes about time zones, the fake warm-up laughs. Then Greg launched into his overview, my slide deck behind him, my work explained in his voice. None of that bothered me. I was used to being the shadow. It went sideways when they started asking detailed questions. On this screen, the client said, highlighting a feature, it looks like we're still 2 weeks out. Our internal rollout date is fixed. Can we really still make that? I opened my mouth because I had the answer. I had 3 answers, depending on how honest Greg wanted to be. But before I could speak, he put a hand up without even looking at me. We're on track, he said smoothly. No issues there. There were issues. I'd flagged them in an email 3 days earlier. Half the back-end work was blocked because another team hadn't delivered the API changes we'd been promised. The honest answer would have been, we'll need 2 extra weeks, or we'll have to cut something. Instead, Greg doubled down. Eli, he said suddenly, turning to me with that fake puzzled expression he likes to use for effect, you've got this under control, right? It was a trap disguised as a question. If I said no, I made him look like he'd just lied. If I said yes, I'd be the one holding the bag when reality hit. We're pushing hard, I said carefully. We flagged some dependency risks last week, but... Greg cut me off with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. See? He said to the screen. This is why I need to keep him away from the client. Eli loves to overcomplicate things. Bottom line is, we'll deliver. Don't worry. A couple of people around the table shifted in their chairs. Nobody said anything. You don't interrupt the man who signs your bonus. The call went on like that for 30 more minutes. Every time I tried to give nuance, Greg flattened it. Every concern became an opportunity. Every risk a minor bump. By the time we said goodbye and the screen went dark, there was a knot behind my eyes that felt like it might never untie. All right, Greg said, clapping his hands once. Internal debrief. Client's happy. That's what matters. He closed the laptop, leaned back against the table, and looked directly at me. Except, he added, we need to talk about your role here, Eli. The room froze in that way where people try very hard to look casual. Someone shuffled papers they didn't need. Someone else checked a phone that hadn't buzzed. My role? I repeated. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. Greg nodded like he was doing me a favor. Look, you're thorough, he said. You live in the details. And that's fine for some positions. But when you start confusing the team and the client with your risks and concerns every 5 minutes, you become, well, he shrugged, you become kind of useless at this level. There it was. The word sat in the middle of the table like something dirty. Nobody laughed, nobody gasped. They just looked down at their notes, their laptops, the table grain. I watched a small chip in the laminate near my hand and thought, very clearly, I will remember that chip for the rest of my life. I'm useless, I asked quietly. Not challenging, just repeating. Greg sighed the way people sigh when they're pretending to be patient. Useless as a senior coordinator, he said. You're not strategic enough. You drag things down with worst-case scenarios. So here's what we're going to do. Starting next week, Lucas is going to take over client-facing responsibilities on this account. Lucas. 2 years younger than me, good hair, good jokes, good at nodding when Greg spoke. He stared at the table like he'd just been told he'd won something he didn't deserve and was trying not to look too happy. You'll move into a more supportive role, Greg continued. Internal tracking, documentation, that sort of thing. Same team, just different expectations. So not only useless, but publicly demoted in one breath. Megan from HR shifted slightly in her chair. Maybe we should discuss this in my office, Greg cut in. Sure, later, which meant never. I looked at each person around the table. I could see it in their faces, discomfort, a flicker of pity, a pinch of relief that it wasn't them. Nobody met my eyes for more than half a second. I'd love to tell you I stood up, told him exactly where he could shove his supportive role, and walked out with my box of things like a movie hero. I didn't. I swallowed, nodded once, and said, understood. Greg smiled satisfied. Good. Meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped back. People filed out with that half-awkward, half-rushed body language of people escaping a fire they absolutely did not start. Lucas mumbled, "Hey, man," as he passed me but didn't finish the sentence. I stayed seated until the room was almost empty. Then I picked up my notebook, flipped to a clean page, and wrote down one sentence. April 14th, 3:47 p.m., called useless in front of team, demoted to support. It looked small on the page, cramped between bullet points about deployment dates and test coverage. But as I stared at the ink, I realized it wasn't just a note. It was the first line of something else. On my way back to my desk, Greg caught up to me in the hallway. "Don't take it personally," he said, clapping my shoulder like we were buddies. "You're still valuable. Just in the background. Play your part, and we'll be fine." I looked at his hand on my shoulder, then at his face. For a second, I almost believed him, like I always had. Like maybe I really was just overreacting, just too sensitive, just not strategic. "Sure," I said instead. "I'll play my part." He walked away, already on to his next performance. Back at my desk, I opened my inbox. At the top, like it had been waiting for me, was the email I'd sent him 3 days earlier. Subject: Risk. API delivery may impact client timeline. Below it, his 2-word reply: Noted. Ignore. I stared at that for a long time. Then I created a new folder in my email. I named it simply Records. Dragged the thread into it, then the previous ones, then the one before that. If he thought I was useless, I decided, I'd let him test that theory properly. No more late-night patch jobs to save his promises. No more gentle warnings that he could brush off and then pretend he'd never heard. No more glue. He wanted me in the background. Fine. I would move into the background, quietly, carefully. And for the first time in 5 years, I would stop holding his world together for him. The first week after the demotion felt like working inside someone else's life. Same desk, same keyboard, same badge beeping against the glass doors every morning. But the air had changed, or maybe it was just me. People didn't look at me the same way. Some avoided my eyes. Some smiled too politely. The kind of smile people give to someone who's just lost something, but they don't want to say it out loud. Lucas got the project lead badge printed the next day. He didn't show it to me. Someone else mentioned it in the kitchen like gossip about a celebrity sighting. When we passed each other by the printer, he gave me a stiff nod, unsure if he should apologize or congratulate himself. I didn't hold it against him, not then. Greg, on the other hand, leaned into his new reality. He loved it, I could tell. He walked taller for those first few days, as if shedding me from his strategic circle had freed him from gravity. At our Monday stand-up, he opened with a joke about how too many cooks spoil the timeline, and how we'd be streamlining communication channels. Everyone laughed a little too quickly. My tasks shrank overnight. Instead of managing the client rollout, I was reorganizing internal documentation and updating Jira tickets someone else had created. It was the kind of work you give to an intern to see whether they can follow instructions. Greg dropped a stack of spreadsheets on my desk around noon and said, "You're detail-oriented. This stuff suits you better." Suits you better? That one sat just under my ribs. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him that for 5 years he hadn't been able to make sense of a spreadsheet unless I color-coded it. I nodded, took the stack, and added it to my records folder after scanning each page. Every assignment, every shift in responsibility, every remark, I kept them all. People think revenge starts with anger. Mine didn't. Mine started with clarity. Around midweek, Greg asked me to stay late. "Look," he said, leaning on the edge of my desk, "Lucas needs help preparing the talking points for Friday's sync. Just some behind-the-scenes stuff. Can you clean up the notes? Tonight, ideally." "Is this part of my new role?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He blinked, once, twice, surprised I'd asked a direct question. "Well, not officially, but we're all on the same team, right? Just help him get up to speed." There was a time I would have said yes before he finished the sentence. A time when I thought being reliable would eventually get noticed. That time was gone. "I can do it tomorrow," I said, "within work hours." Greg let out a breathy laugh. "Eli, come on. You used to go the extra mile." "And look where that got me." He stiffened. Just slightly. "You're being difficult." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being exactly what you said I was. Background support. Background support works during background hours." For a second he looked like he might explode. But then he checked himself, because the hallway wasn't empty, and the HR office was 2 doors down. "Fine," he snapped. "Tomorrow." He walked away fast, shoulders tight. That night I left at 5:01 p.m. For the first time in months, the sky was still light when I stepped outside, and then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. I realized on the train ride home that Greg had relied on my invisible work for so long he didn't even know what pieces I usually kept in motion. And now those pieces were sitting exactly where he left them. The next day, the client emailed with a simple question. Can we get the updated integration timeline? Lucas froze. Greg stalled, and I sat at my desk watching the two of them scramble through emails they'd never bothered to read, trying to find the version I'd already sent them last week. I didn't volunteer it. I just kept my hands on my keyboard and waited. Greg finally stormed over, red in the face. Do you have the damn timeline? He hissed. Which one? I asked. The latest. I sent it to you last Friday at 6:12 p.m., I said. Subject line, updated integration timeline with dependencies. I turned my monitor so he could see the email. You replied, got it. He stared at the screen, his email, his green checkmark approving the work he now pretended I hadn't done. For a brief moment, something like embarrassment crossed his face, a micro-expression, gone quickly, but there. That doesn't matter, he muttered. Just forward it to me. I did, slowly, then added it to the records folder. Later that afternoon, I overheard Lucas asking him why the client seemed confused about delivery dates. That's because Eli keeps drowning them in worst-case scenarios, Greg said. That night, I stopped being the hero. No more protecting him. No more bridging gaps. No more saving a project that no longer had my name on it. I went home early again. I cooked myself dinner. I slept well for the first time in weeks. The following Monday, things got worse. For him. The client escalated concerns about the API delays. We flagged this weeks ago, they wrote. Why wasn't this communicated sooner? Greg tried to spin it. We were managing the risks internally. I replied, CCing the new director because transparency is a beautiful thing, with the original chain showing every warning I had sent. There was no commentary, no passive aggression, just facts. Greg replied privately within a minute. What the hell are you doing? I answered, providing context. He didn't respond. That week, rumors started circulating that our region's performance was under review. The VP scheduled a visit. Greg seemed nervous for the first time in years. He snapped more, blamed more, checked over my shoulder as if waiting for me to slip. But I didn't slip. I documented. I kept everything tight, clean, and professional. I didn't sabotage. I didn't twist facts. I didn't lie. I simply let his decisions exist in daylight. He thought I was gone. I wasn't. The real shift came that Thursday morning during the project sync with the VP. Greg tried to present his usual polished, confident overview, but the cracks were showing. When the VP asked why deadlines had moved without notice, Greg looked to Lucas. When she asked about risk management, he looked to me, and I just looked back, calm, quiet, unhelpful in the exact way he'd trained me to be. We've had some internal communication challenges, Greg stammered. The VP turned to me. Eli, is that accurate? I opened the folder on my laptop, the one labeled Records. I can walk you through the timeline if you'd like, I said. Greg's jaw tightened. That won't be necessary, he cut in. But the VP raised her hand. Actually, Greg, I want to hear it. And that's when everything shifted. That was the moment he realized the person he'd called useless could dismantle his entire facade. Not with anger, not with drama, but with receipts. And I wasn't done yet. If part 2 was the slow pressure building behind a wall, part 3 was the moment the foundation finally cracked. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, inevitable sound of something giving way under its own weight. The VP scheduled a follow-up meeting the next week. In corporate language, it wasn't a hearing, but everyone felt the gravity of it. People dressed nicer, sat straighter, and avoided small talk in the hallways. Even Greg arrived 10 minutes early, a rarity in the known universe. He paced by the windows, pretending to check his phone, but the way he kept rubbing his palms on his pants told the truth. The room filled slowly. Lucas slipped into a chair by the wall. Two developers whispered about something unrelated, trying to look calm. I sat near the middle, laptop open, records folder ready. Greg kept glancing at me like I was a live wire he needed to keep his distance from, but couldn't stop thinking about. The VP entered without ceremony, nodded once, and said, Let's begin. Greg jumped in, trying to take control of the narrative. We've been aligning internally, he said with a smile that didn't belong on his face. Some unexpected bandwidth issues slowed us down last cycle, but we're adjusting. Nothing that will affect long-term delivery. A pause. A long one. Then the VP spoke. That's interesting, Greg, she said, because the client's latest report lists multiple red flags, and your team submitted 3 different versions of the same timeline within 10 days. Her tone wasn't angry. It was colder than that. Administrative coldness. The kind that makes grown adults regret their choices. Greg cleared his throat. There were miscommunications. I'm resolving them. The VP looked at him for a long moment before turning to me. Eli, can you walk me through the documented timeline? I'd like to understand when each risk was raised. Greg's head snapped toward me. His eyes said, don't you dare. But he'd forfeited the right to those words weeks ago. Yes, I said simply. I opened my laptop, the soft click of the hinge sounding louder than it had any business sounding. The air tightened. I projected the timeline onto the screen. Every date, every flagged dependency, every ignored warning, every noted ignore. Nothing embellished, nothing dramatic. Just the truth, laid out chronologically. About halfway through, Megan from HR closed her notebook gently, as if recognizing she no longer needed to write anything. The story was already complete. Greg kept trying to insert himself. Well, that was taken out of context. That email wasn't meant as a hard commitment. He's misinterpreting that. The VP raised a hand again. Greg, he's reading your words verbatim. He shut his mouth. The room exhaled. When I finished, the VP folded her hands. So what I'm seeing is a repeated pattern of flagged issues that weren't addressed, and a repeated pattern of overpromising externally while ignoring internal risk documentation. Nobody moved. Nobody dared breathe too loudly. Greg tried to recover, his voice thin. I empower my team to speak up, but Eli tends to fixate on worst-case scenarios, which makes things appear... The VP cut him off. Greg, the worst-case scenarios he flagged became the actual scenarios. He flinched. I wouldn't say that. She turned to Lucas next. Lucas, as project lead, were you aware of these flagged issues? Lucas looked like a man watching the ceiling collapse in slow motion. His voice cracked on the first word. I thought Greg had handled them. Silence fell again, but this time it was heavier. Then the VP stood. No preamble. All right, here's what's going to happen. Greg, effective immediately, you're relieved of external project responsibilities. All client communication will go through me, and... She looked at me. Eli. My heart didn't jump. It didn't explode with joy. It didn't do anything dramatic. It just steadied, like it had been waiting for alignment and finally found it. Greg stepped forward, anger finally breaking through his corporate mask. You can't be serious, he said. He's the reason this looks bad. He's been undermining me. The VP stared at him like she was examining a malfunctioning appliance. Your failures aren't his sabotage, Greg. They're your failures. A murmur ran through the room. Quiet, electric, the kind of sound people make when they witness gravity shift. Greg's face twitched. This is ridiculous, he said, voice rising. I've built this team. I've kept this project alive. He's the one who... But he stopped mid-sentence. Because the VP didn't look impressed. She looked done. Greg, come with me, she said. HR will join us. HR. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. He turned toward Megan, expecting rescue, but HR didn't move to comfort him. She simply picked up her pen and followed the VP out of the room. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and that was it. Not fireworks, not screaming, not fists on tables, just the quiet, irreversible sound of someone losing their footing on the ladder they'd spent years climbing. The team sat frozen. Then slowly, people started breathing again. A few glanced at me, not with pity, not with discomfort, with acknowledgement. The meeting dissolved after that. People filed out in small clusters, whispering, recalibrating. The world had shifted a few inches. I walked back to my desk in silence. No rush, no adrenaline, just clarity. 10 minutes later, Lucas approached, looking like someone had unplugged him. "Eli," he said quietly, I didn't know it was that bad." "You didn't ask," I replied. Not cruel, just true. He opened his mouth like he wanted to apologize, then thought better of it, and simply nodded. After lunch, the VP called me into our office. "I want you on this project formally," she said. "Your risk management is solid, and frankly, it's the only reason things didn't collapse sooner." I nodded, listening. Then I surprised both of us. "I'd like to stay on until we stabilize the project," I said, "but I won't be here long term." She blinked. "May I ask why?" I thought about Greg, about the years I'd spent being the glue, about how easy it had been for him to call me useless because I'd hidden everything I did so well he forgot it existed. "Because I've already accepted an offer," I said. "A competitor, higher pay, better boundaries." The VP leaned back, absorbing that. Then she nodded. "Fair," she said. "You deserve better." There was no anger, no pleading, just recognition, the thing I'd been denied for so long. As I stood to leave, she added, "Before you go, thank you for being the only adult in the room these past months. Not praise, not a compliment, just truth." Walking back to my desk, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not triumph. Peace, but sharpened, like a blade cooling after fire. Greg thought I was gone. He had no idea I'd been here the whole time, just waiting for the moment he finally tripped over his own shadow. Greg didn't come back to his desk after that meeting. Nobody announced anything officially that afternoon, but the absence was loud. His mug was still there, the half-dead plant, the jacket he always draped over the back of his chair. It all looked like a still frame from a life that had already moved on without asking him. People walked past that empty chair slower than usual, like they were trying to figure out if they should feel sorry for him or if sympathy would somehow make them guilty. In corporate environments, nobody ever says it out loud, but everyone understands. Consequences travel quietly, but when they arrive, they don't knock. I kept my head down, finished my tasks, cleaned up documentation the way I always did. No victory lap, no smirk, no celebration. Winning isn't the point when the entire problem collapses under its own weight. Late in the afternoon, Megan stopped by my desk. "The VP asked me to let you know," she said softly. "Greg has been placed on administrative leave during a performance review." Administrative leave. Another quiet guillotine. "Thank you," I said, and she nodded like she understood that those two words carried much more than politeness. She hesitated. "You handled all of this with more professionalism than most people I've ever seen," she said. There was no ceremony in her voice, no exaggerated praise, just a simple acknowledgement from someone who'd witnessed the truth behind every door. By the end of the week, Greg's nameplate was removed. I didn't ask what happened in the HR room. I didn't need to. I'd spent months watching him dig the hole he finally fell into. They always think the fall happens suddenly. It doesn't. It happens grain by grain, lie by lie, shortcut by shortcut, until the ground gives out. A few days later, the VP called me again. "We'd like to offer you the project lead role formally," she said. "Title adjustment, salary adjustment, whatever you need to stay." I had expected it. I still took a breath before I answered. "I appreciate it," I said. "Truly. But I'm leaving next month." She nodded slowly. "I had a feeling. Not because of this company," I added. "I just realized how much I had allowed myself to shrink here." "That makes sense," she said. "I hope the next place sees you fully." After we ended the call, I sat for a moment at my desk, looking at the shape my life had taken inside those gray walls. So many nights spent saving things that weren't mine to save. So many mornings spent holding together a structure someone else kept breaking. I didn't regret it. I wasn't bitter. But I was done being the quiet glue in someone else's hands. My last weeks were strangely peaceful. The team was warmer toward me. Lucas apologized again, this time genuinely. "I should have checked in with you," he said. "I just assumed Greg knew what he was doing." "Assumptions are expensive," I replied, but without edge. He nodded like he'd learned something he wished he'd known earlier. On my final Wednesday, the team took me to lunch. Nothing big. Burgers, fries, sunlight through the windows. A table where nobody felt the need to pick a side. People told stories about old releases, late-night fixes, the time we almost broke production on a Friday the 13th. Normal stories from normal people. It felt like closing a book you actually liked. When we returned to the office, a group of devs surprised me with a small card. No dramatic speeches, just their signatures and a note at the bottom. "You were the only one who never made our jobs harder." It meant more than any title ever had. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk. 2 notebooks, a stack of receipts for office supplies I'd bought myself because Greg didn't believe in budgets, a photo of my dog, not much else. When you've spent years being the background, you don't accumulate many things that belong to you. I left my badge on the receptionist's counter. The door slid open and the air outside felt sharp and honest. Not exciting, just real. The next Monday, my new job began. New building, new desk, new people who greeted me without the stiffness of colleagues bracing for impact. The work was similar, but the feeling was different. When I flagged a risk, someone said, "Good catch." When I outlined a timeline, someone said, "That makes sense." When I asked a question, nobody sighed like I'd complicated the universe. Respect isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's felt. 2 weeks in, the VP from my old company emailed me to say the project had stabilized, and the client was happy again. She thanked me for my crucial groundwork. I smiled at that. Not because I needed the recognition, but because it finally felt proportional. A month later, I ran into Greg. It was at a grocery store, of all places. He stood by the self-checkout, wearing a jacket that didn't quite fit, and holding a basket of microwave dinners and an off-brand energy drink. His eyes met mine for a second. A flicker of something passed through them. Not anger, not pride, just a hollow absence where arrogance used to live. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, maybe nothing at all. I nodded once, politely, and walked past him. Some stories don't need an epilogue. Some endings don't need a speech. Outside, the sky was pale blue, the kind you only notice when your mind isn't carrying someone else's chaos. I drove home with the window cracked, air moving through the car like it was clearing out everything that didn't belong. My house was quiet when I walked in, not the heavy silence of stress, the kind that presses on your chest, but the soft kind, the kind that feels like a room that finally fits its owner. I made dinner, simple, clean, not rushed. I answered messages from people who meant their words. I made plans for the weekend without checking someone else's mood. I read a chapter of a book I'd abandoned months ago. Then I sat at my kitchen table, the same way I had on the day Greg called me useless, and realized something simple. He wasn't wrong because he insulted me. He was wrong because he believed it. And sometimes the quietest revenge is proving to yourself that you never needed the people who underestimated you in the first place. The truth is, I didn't become better after I left. I just stopped dimming the parts of myself that were already working. And once the noise was gone, the rest of my life made room.